Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to find yourself, the more lost you seem to become? Think about it for a moment. You've probably spent years, maybe decades, on this quest. You've read the books, done the meditation retreats, perhaps even traveled to distant lands seeking some mystical revelation about who you truly are. You've analyzed your childhood, dissected your relationships, examined your dreams, and yet here you are, still searching, still somehow feeling like the real you is hiding just around the corner, just out of reach. What if I told you there's a reason for this endless frustration? What if the very act of searching for yourself is like trying to catch your own shadow? The faster you chase it, the faster it runs away from you. Picture, if you will, a cat chasing its own tail. Round and round it goes, with increasing fervor and decreasing dignity, convinced that if it could just move a little faster, turn a little sharper, it would finally catch that elusive prize. The tail, of course, moves with perfect synchronicity, always just out of reach, always tantalizingly close. Now, my friend, I want you to consider the possibility that this is precisely what we're doing when we embark on that most sacred of modern quests, the search to find ourselves. You've been told, haven't you, that deep down inside there's a real you waiting to be discovered. That if you could just dig deep enough, meditate long enough, analyze thoroughly enough, you would finally unearth this precious gem of authentic selfhood that has been buried beneath years of conditioning and social programming. But what if I told you that this entire enterprise is not just futile, but magnificently, beautifully, cosmically absurd? What if the very one doing the searching is the very thing that cannot be found? What if in our desperate attempt to locate ourselves, we're engaging in the most elaborate game of hide and seek ever devised, a game where the seeker and the sought are one and the same? Let me share with you a rather startling observation. You cannot bite your own teeth. Go ahead, try it. I'll wait. You see, the teeth cannot turn upon themselves any more than a knife can cut itself or an eye can see itself without a mirror. And yet, this is precisely what we attempt when we try to capture our own essence, to pin down our identity like a butterfly in a collector's case. The mind, that wonderful instrument of consciousness, has a peculiar limitation. It can examine almost anything in the universe, from the dance of subatomic particles to the wheeling of galaxies. But the one thing it cannot directly observe is itself in the act of observing. It's like trying to illuminate a room with a flashlight while simultaneously examining the flashlight's beam. The moment you turn the light on, the source of illumination, you've changed the very thing you're trying to observe. This is the fundamental paradox at the heart of self-discovery. The eye that seeks to know itself is like a dog chasing its own tail, or more precisely, like a mirror trying to reflect itself. It creates an infinite regress, a hall of mirrors, where each reflection claims to be more real than the last. But none of them are actually the mirror itself. We've become convinced, through centuries of Western philosophical conditioning, that there's a little man inside our heads, a pilot, a commander, an executive self that sits behind our eyes like a captain on the bridge of a ship, separate from and in control of the vessel of our body. But this, my dear friend, is the most persistent and seductive of illusions. Now, let me tell you about this curious character we call the ego. The ego, you see, is rather like a radar system on a ship. Its job is to scan the horizon for problems, to identify potential threats, to troubleshoot and problem solve. It's actually quite good at this job. Without it, we'd walk into traffic, forget to eat, fail to notice when someone is angry with us. The radar keeps us alive and functioning in a complex world. But here's where things get rather twisted. Somewhere along the way, we made a fundamental error. We began to identify ourselves with the radar system. We mistook the troubleshooter for the captain, the scanning device for the essence of who we are. And what happens when you identify yourself with a mechanism whose primary function is to find problems? You become a person who defines yourself as being in a perpetual state of anxiety, always scanning for the next crisis, the next inadequacy, the next thing that needs fixing. The radar, designed to operate intermittently, to sweep, detect, and then rest, instead becomes a constant grinding worry machine. It's like having a smoke detector that never stops beeping even when there's no fire. This is why so many people feel chronically anxious or dissatisfied, even when their lives are objectively quite pleasant. They've confused their identity with their problem detection system, and a problem detection system that finds no problems is, from its own perspective, failing at its job. So it creates problems to solve, inadequacies to address, improvements to make. And this brings us to one of the most cunning aspects of the whole game: self-improvement. Oh, what a beautiful trap this is. Here you are, convinced that there's something wrong with you that needs fixing, something lacking that needs to be added, something broken that needs to be repaired. So you set about the noble task of improving yourself. But notice the exquisite circularity here. The very you that's going to do the improving is precisely the you that supposedly needs improving. It's like asking a broken compass to navigate to the repair shop, or expecting a dirty window to clean itself. The reformer and the reformed are the same entity, which means the whole enterprise is rather like trying to lift yourself off the ground by pulling on your own shoelaces. You see, every act of self-improvement contains within it the implicit assumption that you are currently not good enough. The very effort to become better is a continuous affirmation of your present inadequacy. The person who strives for happiness is by that very striving confirming their current unhappiness. The person who works to overcome their selfishness is, through that very effort, making their self the center of their universe. It's a wonderfully clever trap. And the more sincere your efforts, the more thoroughly trapped you become. You read books about finding your authentic self, and this creates yet another layer of inauthenticity. The person who's trying to be authentic. You meditate to achieve inner peace, and this creates the meditator who's seeking something they don't have. You practice gratitude to overcome negativity, and this creates someone who's working to manufacture appreciation. Each solution becomes a new problem. Each answer generates new questions, and the whole magnificent edifice of self-development keeps building higher and higher into the sky, like a Tower of Babel reaching toward a heaven that doesn't exist in the way we imagine it. Now, let me share with you a rather extraordinary way of looking at this whole situation. Suppose, just for a moment, that what we call existence, or the universe, or God, or the Tao, or whatever name you prefer, for the fundamental reality of things, suppose this is playing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek with itself. Picture, if you will, the ultimate consciousness, the ground of all being, becoming so skilled at this game that it actually manages to hide from itself completely. It divides itself into billions upon billions of apparently separate beings, each convinced they are isolated individuals in a vast, often hostile universe. Each fragment believes it has been somehow thrown into existence without its consent, that it must struggle to survive and find meaning in what appears to be a random, chaotic world. But here's the twist. The very sense of being lost, the very feeling of separation and inadequacy is part of the game. The cosmic consciousness has hidden so thoroughly that it has actually convinced itself through us that it really is lost. We are the universe playing peekaboo with itself, and we've become so good at hiding that we've forgotten we're playing. The search for the true self is the universe's way of starting to seek itself. Like someone who's been hiding in a closet for so long, they begin to wonder if there's a world outside. The spiritual quest, the psychological journey, the philosophical inquiry, all of these are the cosmos beginning to turn around and look for itself. But here's what's so beautifully absurd about it. What you are, fundamentally deep down, far in, is the very fabric and structure of existence itself. You are not in the universe like a raisin in a pudding. You are the universe expressing itself temporarily as a human being. Just as the ocean expresses itself as waves, or a tree expresses itself as leaves. So what does this mean for our daily lives? Does this mean we should abandon all effort? Stop caring about anything? Become passive lumps of flesh, waiting for enlightenment to strike us like lightning? Not at all. But it does suggest a radically different way of approaching the whole business of living. Instead of trying to find yourself, What if you simply stopped looking? Instead of working to improve yourself, what if you began to accept what you are? I don't mean passive resignation or giving up on growth and change. I mean something far more subtle and paradoxical. When you stop trying to capture your identity, you discover that you're free to be flexible, to change, to experiment, to play with different ways of being without feeling like you're betraying some essential truth about yourself. When you stop insisting that you must be a particular type of person, you become free to respond spontaneously to whatever life brings your way. It's rather like learning to swim. When you first get in the water, your natural instinct is to tense up, to try to control your relationship with this foreign element by force and will. But the water doesn't respond to force. If you grab onto it, you sink. If you fight it, you drown. The secret of swimming is learning to trust the water, to relax into it, to let it support you. To have faith is to trust yourself to the water. When you swim, you don't grab hold of the water, because if you do, you will sink and drown. Instead, you relax and float. Life is very much like water in this respect. The more we try to grasp it, to control it, to force it into the shapes we think it should take, the more likely we are to find ourselves struggling and exhausted. But when we learn to work with the natural flow of things, when we stop fighting the current and learn to navigate by going with it rather than against it, we discover a kind of effortless effectiveness. Now, I want to suggest to you that what we call personality, or character, or self, is much more like a dance than a thing, more like a river than a rock, more like music than a sculpture. A dance doesn't exist anywhere except in the dancing. A river is not the water that was in it yesterday or will be in it tomorrow, but the dynamic pattern of flow itself. Music isn't any particular note or chord, but the relationships between sounds unfolding in time. Similarly, what you are is not some fixed entity that needs to be discovered and polished and improved. You are a process, a happening, a continuous improvisation in the grand symphony of existence. You are the way the universe is expressing itself right here, right now, through the particular combination of genetics, experiences, thoughts, and circumstances that seem to cluster around the pronoun I. This is why trying to pin down your true self is like trying to capture the wind in a jar, or like asking what color Wednesday is, or wondering where your lap goes when you stand up. The question itself is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what kind of phenomenon we're dealing with. You don't have a self that you need to discover. You are a selfing, if I may coin a verb. You are the activity of being conscious, the process of experiencing, the dance of awareness as it encounters moment after moment of existence. And like any dance, it's most beautiful when it's not self-conscious, when it flows naturally and spontaneously from the music of the moment. One of the most liberating realizations you can have is that you don't need to know who you are in order to live a rich, full, meaningful life. In fact, the insistence on knowing who you are may be precisely what prevents you from living such a life. Think about the times when you've been most alive, most engaged, most fully present. Were you thinking about your identity in those moments? Were you analyzing your authentic self or working on your personal development? Probably not. You were likely completely absorbed in whatever you were doing, playing with a child, making love, creating something beautiful, helping someone in need, or simply watching a sunset. In those moments, there was no gap between you and your experience. There was no observer standing apart from the observed, no seeker separate from what was being sought. There was just the seamless flow of conscious activity, the dance of being fully present to what is. This is what the Zen masters mean when they talk about no mind, or what the Taoists call wu wei, action that arises naturally from the situation without the interference of the controlling ego. It's not that the mind disappears, but that it stops trying to be in charge of everything and instead becomes a clear, responsive instrument of awareness. When you realize that you don't need to find yourself because you never lost yourself, when you understand that you don't need to become authentic because you never stopped being authentic, when you see that you don't need to discover your purpose because you are the universe discovering itself through you, then you're free to live with a kind of playful seriousness, a relaxed intensity, a purposeful purposelessness. Here's another way to look at this whole business. Other people are mirrors in which you can see aspects of yourself, but no single mirror, and certainly not the collection of all mirrors, can show you your complete face. Each person you meet reflects back to you certain qualities, certain possibilities, certain aspects of the infinite potential that you are. But if you try to construct your identity from these reflections, you end up with a kind of patchwork self, a Frankenstein monster stitched together from other people's opinions and observations. The paradox is that the more you try to see yourself clearly, the more distorted the image becomes. It's like trying to examine your own face by getting closer and closer to a mirror. At a certain point, all you can see is your nose, and you might conclude that you are nothing but nostril. Step back, and you can see your whole face, but you miss the intimate details. Step back further, and you become a tiny figure in a vast reflected landscape. The appropriate distance for self-reflection is not a fixed measurement, but a dynamic responsiveness. Sometimes you need to zoom in and pay attention to the details of your thoughts and feelings. Sometimes you need to zoom out and see yourself as part of the larger patterns of family, society, and cosmos. But always, always, you need to remember that the reflection is not the thing being reflected. You are not your thoughts about yourself. You are not other people's opinions of you. You are not your roles, your achievements, your failures, or your potential. You are the awareness in which all of these appear and disappear, the space in which the drama of personality plays itself out. When you really understand that the search for the real you is a magnificent cosmic joke, you become free to play with identity rather than being trapped by it. You can try on different ways of being like an actor, trying on costumes, knowing that no single costume is who you really are, but also knowing that each costume reveals something interesting about the infinite theatrical potential of consciousness. You can be passionate about your work without believing that your work defines you. You can love deeply without thinking that your relationships complete you. You can have opinions without being opinionated, preferences without being attached, goals without being driven. This doesn't make you wishy-washy or uncommitted. If anything, it allows you to be more fully engaged, because you're not constantly worried about whether your engagement is authentic or appropriate to your true self. You can throw yourself wholeheartedly into whatever you're doing because you understand that wholehearted engagement is your true self, regardless of the particular content of what you're engaged with. It's like the difference between an actor who's so worried about whether they're playing the role correctly that they can't actually inhabit the character, and an actor who understands that complete commitment to the role, even while knowing it's a role, is what creates great theater. Now, you might be wondering, if the search for the true self is hopeless, does that mean there's no point in spiritual practice, therapy, meditation, or any form of inner work? Not at all. But it does mean approaching these activities with a very different attitude. Instead of using meditation to find yourself, you can use it to lose yourself, to dissolve the rigid boundaries between observer and observed, to rest in the pure awareness that's always already here. Instead of using therapy to fix yourself, you can use it to understand how the story of needing to be fixed gets constructed and maintained. Instead of using spiritual practice to become enlightened, you can use it to realize that you never stop being the light of consciousness itself. The pathless path is the recognition that you're already where you're trying to go. The journey of awakening is not about getting somewhere else, but about recognizing where you've always been. It's not about becoming something different, but about seeing through the illusion that you're something fixed that could become different. This is why the great Zen master Huang Po said, "Your everyday mind, that is the way." The ordinary consciousness that's reading these words right now, the awareness that's considering these ideas, the experience of being present to this moment, this is already the enlightenment you're seeking. There's nowhere else to go and nothing else to find. But, and this is crucial, this recognition doesn't come as a result of seeking. It comes as the natural consequence of understanding why seeking is unnecessary. It's not an achievement, but a relaxation, not an acquisition, but a release, not a becoming, but a simple being. So, how does this understanding translate into daily life? How do you live when you've seen through the myth of the solid self that needs to be discovered and improved? You live more lightly, more playfully, more responsively. You take your personality less seriously while taking your humanity more seriously. You might still have preferences, but you hold them lightly. You might still have goals, but you pursue them without desperation. You might still face challenges, but you meet them without the added burden of thinking that your response to them defines your worth as a person. When someone asks you who you are, you might find yourself smiling and saying something like, "I'm whoever I need to be in this moment," or "I'm the universe having a human experience," or simply, "I'm here." You realize that the question itself comes from the same misunderstanding that created the problem in the first place. You begin to see that asking, "Who am I?" is like asking, "What color is music?" or "How much does Wednesday weigh?" These aren't deep philosophical questions. They're category errors, attempts to apply the wrong kind of measurement to the wrong kind of phenomenon. Instead of "Who am I?" you might find yourself asking more practical questions. What wants to happen here? How can I be helpful in this situation? What would love do? These questions don't require you to consult some inner oracle of authentic selfhood. They invite you to be present and responsive to what's actually happening right now. There's something wonderfully humorous about all of this, isn't there? Here we are, consciousness looking for consciousness, awareness trying to be aware of awareness, the universe playing an elaborate game of hide and seek with itself, and then writing philosophy papers about how hard it is to find what was never lost. It's like spending years searching for your glasses while they're sitting on top of your head, or like a fish that's dying of thirst because it's looking everywhere for water except in the ocean. It's swimming in. The cosmic joke is that what you're seeking is what's doing the seeking. But here's the beautiful thing about jokes. The laughter comes not when you figure out the punchline through analysis, but when you suddenly get it in a flash of recognition. And once you've laughed, really laughed, at the absurdity of trying to find what was never lost, you can never quite take the search seriously again. This doesn't mean you become cynical or nihilistic. If anything, you become more appreciative of the incredible creativity and artistry involved in the cosmic game. You begin to marvel at the universe's capacity to hide from itself so thoroughly, to create such convincing illusions of separation and inadequacy, to generate such elaborate dramas of seeking and finding. You start to appreciate your own role in this grand performance. You see that your confusion, your seeking, your dissatisfaction, even your sense of being lost, all of this is part of the beautiful complexity of consciousness, exploring its own infinite potential. And so, my friend, I invite you to consider the possibility of stopping. Not stopping living, not stopping caring, not stopping growing and changing and engaging with the world, but stopping the relentless, exhausting, futile search for a self that exists only in the searching. What would it be like to wake up tomorrow without the burden of having to figure out who you really are? What would it feel like to engage with your day without constantly checking to see if your responses are authentic? If your choices align with your true nature? If you're living up to your potential? What if you could trust that whatever arises in you, thoughts, feelings, impulses, responses, is already the authentic expression of what you are in this moment? Not because you've discovered your true self, but because you've realized that the idea of a false self that needs to be overcome is itself the illusion. You can feel yourself not as a stranger in the world, not as something here on probation, not as something that has arrived here by fluke, but you can begin to feel your own existence as absolutely fundamental. This is not a philosophy to believe in, but a reality to recognize. It's not something to achieve, but something to notice, has always already been the case. You are not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. Not a question to be answered, but an answer that's continuously questioning itself. The hopeless game of trying to find yourself ends not in victory or defeat, but in the simple recognition that the player and the prize were never actually separate. The seeker dissolves into the sought. The question melts into the questioner. And what remains is just this: the pure, simple, obvious fact of being aware, being present, being here. And here, it turns out, is not a place you can find on any map. Here is not a destination you can reach through any journey. Here is where you always already are, the very ground of your being, the unavoidable fact of your existence in this moment. When you truly understand this, you might find yourself laughing, not because it's funny exactly, but because it's so obvious, so simple, so immediately present, that the complexity you've built around it seems suddenly absurd. Like someone who's been digging elaborate tunnels looking for buried treasure while standing on a field of gold. The search ends not in a great discovery, but in a great relaxation. You don't find yourself, you realize you were never lost. You don't become authentic. You recognize you never stopped being authentic. You don't achieve enlightenment. You wake up to the light that was always already shining. And in that recognition, you're finally free to live. Not as someone who's found themselves, but as the very process of life finding itself through you, moment by moment, breath by breath, exactly as you are, exactly as this is, exactly now. The game is over. The joke has been told. The laughter echoes through the cosmos. And you, my dear friend, are both the comedian and the audience, the seeker and the sought, the question and the answer, dancing together in the eternal play of consciousness, knowing itself. So stop searching. Start living. The very thing you thought you needed to find has been here all along. Reading these words, breathing this breath, being this moment of awareness that needs no improvement, no discovery, no authentication. You are already home.